The dusty air of the small frontier town clung heavy with tension that afternoon. The sun, relentless as ever, beat down upon the crowd gathered near the wooden platform. Farmers, ranchers, and drifters leaned against fence posts or hitched their horses nearby, whispering with uneasy curiosity. At the center of it all stood a thin, weathered man with hollow eyes, his hand gripping the arm of a trembling young girl. Two more stood beside her, their heads bowed, their faces pale with shame and fear. The man was their father, and desperation had driven him to a place no parent should ever go. He shouted his offer to the gathering crowd, his voice breaking with a mix of shame and stubbornness. 3 healthy girls, strong enough to work your house or your land. Bid what you can. His words rang out like a curse. The sisters clung to each other, tears streaking through the dirt on their cheeks. The youngest, no more than 14, trembled so violently her knees almost gave way. The middle sister, barely 16, wrapped an arm protectively around her, while the eldest, perhaps 18, lifted her chin defiantly though her eyes betrayed the terror burning inside her. The crowd murmured, some turning away in disgust, others shifting uncomfortably, and a few greedy men whispering amongst themselves. It was a scene out of nightmare, and no one dared step forward, until one man did. Ezekiel Hart, a widower in his 50s with broad shoulders and a graying beard, pushed through the gathering. He was known around these parts not for wealth or ruthlessness but for fairness and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. His 3 grown sons worked the ranch with him, each strong, honest, and raised on the values of compassion their late mother had instilled. When Ezekiel saw the girls standing broken and afraid, something in his chest ached. He remembered his own daughters, buried too young from fever. He thought of his wife, who had begged him on her deathbed to always defend the innocent when others turned away. He could not stand idle now. Enough. His booming voice cut through the murmurs. The father flinched, and the crowd went silent. Ezekiel stepped up to the platform, his boots striking the wood with authority. A man doesn't sell his children. Not here. Not while I breathe. The father's face twisted with bitterness. Then you take 'em. Feed 'em if you think you can. I got nothing left but debts. Either I sell them, or we all starve. The words pierced Ezekiel's heart. He saw not only cruelty in the man but desperation. Still, no excuse justified what was happening. Reaching into his coat, Ezekiel pulled out a pouch heavy with coin, his savings from selling a herd weeks before. He tossed it onto the platform with a clatter. That'll cover your debts. Now you walk away, and you never come near these girls again. The man's eyes widened at the sight of money, greed momentarily overshadowing guilt. With trembling hands, he snatched the pouch, muttered something no one cared to hear, and stumbled off into the dust. All eyes turned to Ezekiel. He approached the girls slowly, careful not to startle them. You're safe now, he said softly, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. No one will harm you under my roof. The eldest sister's lips quivered as she tried to find words. Why would you do this for us? Because you deserve better than what this world tried to hand you, he answered. And with that, he led them away from the crowd, past whispering townsfolk who parted to let them through. His 3 sons, Caleb, Jonah, and Matthew, were waiting with the wagon. They had seen the whole thing from a distance, fury burning in their eyes at the cruelty of the scene. When their father helped the sisters climb onto the wagon, the young men exchanged a look of determination. The ride back to the Hart Ranch was quiet at first, the girls sitting huddled together, unsure if they were truly safe. But gradually, Jonah, the middle son, began to speak softly, telling them about the ranch, the wide fields, the cattle, the horses, the fresh creek that cut through their land. Caleb, the eldest, offered them water and assured them no harm would come their way. Matthew, the youngest and most light-hearted, tried to make the littlest sister smile by pointing out shapes in the clouds above. Slowly, the tension began to ease. Life on the ranch brought healing. At first, the sisters were shy and withdrawn, still carrying the weight of betrayal. But the Hart family treated them not as burdens but as cherished guests. They were given warm beds, good meals, and the dignity of choice, something they had been denied for too long. The eldest sister, Anna, quickly proved herself strong-willed and capable. She rose at dawn to help with the cooking and later worked alongside Caleb in the fields. Their conversations grew from polite exchanges to long, lingering talks under the stars. Respect blossomed into admiration, and admiration into love. The middle sister, Ruth, carried quiet grace but a heavy sorrow for the life she thought she had lost. Jonah, steady and kind, never rushed her but always stayed near, offering gentle comfort. In time, Ruth's laughter returned, and she found in Jonah a partner who valued her voice and her dreams. The youngest, Mary, was still just a child in many ways, but on the ranch she was allowed to be one. She ran barefoot with the chickens, braided the horses' manes, and discovered joy again. Matthew, though older, treated her like a little sister, teasing her playfully but watching over her with fierce protectiveness until she grew into a young woman. When the time was right, even she came to see him not only as a protector but as the man her heart trusted most. Months turned into years, seasons passed, and the once broken sisters flourished into strong, vibrant women. Their love for the Hart brothers deepened, and soon talk of marriage filled the home. Ezekiel, watching it all, felt a quiet pride. He had not rescued the girls to bind them, but to give them freedom. That they chose to join their lives with his sons filled him with peace. The weddings were held on a warm spring morning. The townsfolk gathered, the same people who had once watched the sisters trembling in fear on a platform. Now they saw them radiant in white, walking side by side with men who cherished them. Ezekiel stood tall, tears glistening in his eyes, as he gave his blessing. When the vows were spoken, and the celebrations filled the ranch with music and laughter, it was clear to all that something remarkable had taken place. From despair had come hope, from cruelty had come compassion, and from brokenness had come a family bound not by blood alone but by choice and love. In the quiet of the evening, as the stars spread across the sky, Ezekiel sat on the porch, his pipe in hand. The sound of laughter drifted from the barn where his sons and their new brides celebrated together. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, to his late wife, to God above, and to the strength that had guided him to step forward that day in town. For he knew that sometimes, one act of courage could change not only a life but generations to come. The sun hung mercilessly over the dusty frontier town, baking the earth until the air shimmered. A crowd gathered near the wooden platform at the center, where a gaunt, hollow-eyed man stood gripping the arm of a trembling girl. Two more young women huddled at her side, their faces pale, their eyes cast downward. He raised his voice, cracked with desperation and shame, offering them to the highest bidder. 3 strong girls. They'll work your land or your home. Make your offers now. A hush fell over the people. Some turned away in disgust, some shook their heads, and a few greedy men whispered among themselves. But no one stepped forward. The 3 sisters stood frozen, tears tracking through the dirt on their cheeks. The youngest, hardly 14, shook so violently she seemed about to collapse. The middle girl, no older than 16, wrapped an arm around her protectively, while the eldest, 18 perhaps, tried to lift her chin, her eyes flashing defiance though fear betrayed her. It was a scene as cruel as any the town had witnessed. Yet the father's face bore the look of a man cornered by debts, determined to rid himself of what he could no longer provide for. Shameful whispers ran through the crowd, but no one moved, until a broad-shouldered man with a graying beard pushed through the circle. Ezekiel Hart was known throughout the valley for his fairness, a rancher who worked hard alongside his 3 grown sons. A widower, his wife had passed some years before, but not before leaving him with words he never forgot: defend the innocent, even when others will not. As he stepped up to the platform, anger burned hot in his chest. Enough, Ezekiel thundered, his voice carrying like a crack of thunder. The father startled, and the crowd fell into silence. Ezekiel's boots struck the boards with a steady rhythm as he approached. No man sells his children. Not here. Not ever. Not while I breathe. The father spat bitterly. Then you take them. Feed them if you can. I've nothing left but debts. Either I sell them, or we all starve. His words rang hollow, but they carried the edge of truth. Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a pouch of coins, his savings from a recent cattle sale. With a heavy clatter, he tossed it at the man's feet. Take it, clear your debts, and you walk away from these girls forever. The father's eyes widened at the sight of money. For a moment greed won over guilt. He snatched the pouch, muttered a curse no one cared to hear, and disappeared into the dust. The crowd looked to Ezekiel, who now turned to the girls. He softened his tone, lowering his voice. "You're safe now. No one will harm you under my roof." The eldest, Anna, managed a whisper. "Why? Why would you do this?" "Because you deserve better than the fate you were handed," he said, steady and kind. He led them away from the gawking crowd. Waiting with the wagon were his sons, Caleb, the eldest, serious and steady, Jonah, thoughtful and gentle, and Matthew, the youngest, quick to smile but fiercely protective. They had seen everything from a distance, fury in their eyes. When the sisters climbed into the wagon, the brothers offered quiet assurances. Caleb gave them water, Jonah spoke softly of the ranch, and Matthew pointed out shapes in the clouds until the youngest sister let out the smallest giggle, fragile but real. The ride home marked the beginning of something none of them could yet name. At the Hart Ranch, the sisters were given warm beds, hearty meals, and something more precious than either, dignity. Ezekiel never treated them as burdens, nor did his sons. At first the girls spoke little, still carrying the weight of betrayal. But day by day, the ranch's rhythm wrapped around them. The fields, the cattle, the horses, the endless sky, they became part of it. Anna, the eldest, proved herself quick to learn. She rose early, helped cook, then joined Caleb in the fields. What began as polite conversation turned into long talks under starlight. Caleb admired her strength, the way she never asked for pity but carried herself with quiet determination. In time, respect deepened into affection, and affection into love. Ruth, the middle sister, carried sorrow heavier than her years. Jonah noticed it in her eyes but never pressed her. He simply stayed near, helping when she wished, offering silence when she needed it. His patience wore down her walls, and slowly Ruth found her voice again, found laughter she thought lost forever. Jonah became her anchor, and she, his light. Mary, the youngest, was still little more than a child when she arrived. On the ranch she was allowed to be one again. She chased chickens barefoot, braided the horses' manes, and splashed in the creek. Matthew doted on her like an older brother, playful yet protective. Years passed, and Mary grew into a young woman. The bond they shared matured into something stronger, trust, tenderness, and eventually love that neither had expected. Ezekiel watched it all with quiet pride. He had not brought the sisters home to bind them, but to free them. That they grew to choose his sons of their own hearts filled him with peace. Time passed. The seasons painted the ranch golden, then white, then green again. By the third year, the house rang with more than the sounds of work and duty. It rang with laughter, with courtship, with whispered promises. Caleb and Anna announced their intent to wed, soon followed by Jonah and Ruth. By the time Mary came of age, she too confessed her heart to Matthew. The weddings took place on a spring morning when the wildflowers painted the hills. The townsfolk gathered, curious and eager, some of the very same who had once witnessed the girls trembling on the auction platform. Now they saw three radiant brides, their eyes shining with hope, standing proudly beside the men who loved them. Ezekiel gave his blessing, his voice thick with emotion. The vows were spoken beneath a wide sky, the air filled with song and celebration. It was more than a union of couples. It was the forging of a family, bound not by blood but by choice, by kindness, and by love that had risen from despair. That night, as the stars wheeled above the ranch, Ezekiel sat alone on the porch, pipe in hand. From the barn drifted the sound of music and laughter, his sons and their new wives celebrating with friends. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of thanks, for the strength to step forward that day, for the blessings that had followed, for the promise of generations yet to come. One act of courage had changed everything. From the cruelty of a desperate father had come the compassion of another, and from that compassion grew a legacy of love that would not be forgotten. And so the story of the three sisters did not end on the platform in the dust. It began there, carried home by a man unwilling to look away, and by three sons who proved that love, freely chosen, can heal the deepest wounds.